Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Culture of Bitcoin. Today we're joined by Daz Bea from Looking Glass Education, a platform dedicated to simplifying complex financial concepts, and the Bitcoin Advisor, experts in secure and strategic Bitcoin investment. How are you, Daz?
Pleasure to be here, Adam. Absolutely humbled to be part of your first of many, I hope, Bitcoin podcasts. So, yeah, pleasure to be here and keen for a chat.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, basically, just wanted to start with a simple and easy way of explaining to people what Bitcoin is. Uh, and why is it so significant in today's world?
It's a great question, actually. If I can try and tie that up nicely into a nice, succinct little bow, Bitcoin to me is money how grandma used to treat money. You work hard, you spend less than you earn, and you save the excess in a monetary good that appreciates in purchasing power over a long period of time. And that is essentially the easiest way I can explain Bitcoin. It's money the way money used to work.
Okay. And so, someone new to this, how does one start investing into Bitcoin?
The best way to go about it, for those who aren't familiar with Bitcoin, or perhaps have seen it on the periphery but never really done a deep dive into it, one of the most common themes that you'll hear from newcomers investigating Bitcoin is this notion of volatility. Volatility basically means over a short period of time, the price can move really quite rapidly. And that, more often than not, will scare most people away if they haven't taken the time to really understand what's under the hood. And there's a very good reason why we experience volatility. It's a monetary good that's finding its niche. It's finding its watermark, if you like, in the broader investment landscape throughout the globe. It's a very immature asset. So therefore, we don't have a lot of capital inflows when you compare it against other assets. So it can appear volatile and it can swing around. Small movements in volume on traded volume on Bitcoin can swing those prices up and down quite rapidly. And if you're new to Bitcoin, it can be quite hard to deal with. That's probably the biggest resistance that most people find is like, how can I invest in this thing when it's up 10%, minus 10% the next day? And if I am to give some overarching advice with getting access to Bitcoin, it's a long term play. It is long term savings. It is not savings that you're going to need to pay for the kids' tuck shop next week. It's not savings that you're going to need to fill up the car next week. It is savings that in excess that you put away. And we always kind of the overarching advice is something that you're not going to have to touch for 4 years. It's a 4 year cycle. It works in 4 year cycles. So we always advocate for buy it often, buy it in small chunks, and I'll explain why we do that in a second. What the benefit of doing it that way is, and you come back in 4 years, and you see what your purchasing power has been able to appreciate. Now, if you're new to Bitcoin, you're not putting 90% of your net worth in Bitcoin. You are getting you're starting to learn about Bitcoin. You're starting to dip your toe into Bitcoin. You're starting to get comfortable with this notion of volatility. So if that means it's only a small percentage of your leftover pay at the end of the week, so be it. But what we typically find is that 4 year appreciation in the bull market that is associated with this 4 year cycle tends to make you dig a little bit deeper to understand Bitcoin. And then, like, it's very quickly sort of consumes you in terms of a monetary asset. Like, you want to learn about it. You are enamored by this thing. You want to know how it works. You want to know what's under the hood. Now, I just mentioned this idea around buying it often and in small chunks. So that's something in investing that we call dollar cost averaging. It's
Yep.
been the one of the preferred ways to get access to assets, particularly equities, for a long, long time. And what that basically means is that you buy it and you buy it often. Now, one of the great things with Bitcoin is that you can buy it in small chunks. You don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. That's another thing that scares people off is this, where I think today, as of, what's the date today? 21st of May, 2024, the price is $108,000 for a Bitcoin. You do not have to
Australian
buy
dollars.
Australian dollars. Because
Yes.
thank you for clarifying. 108,000 Australian dollars, and something in the order of 70,000 US. So it's you don't have to buy a whole Bitcoin. It's
No.
divisible. It's divisible to 10 to the negative 8. So that's 8 decimal places. So if your exchange will allow you to buy 10 cents worth of Bitcoin, you can buy 10 cents worth of Bitcoin. So if you're, or you can squirrel away at the end of each week's $10, you can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin each week. If you can obviously spare more, great. And that's this whole notion of using it with money that you won't need in a hurry, right? Yeah. And that's dealing with the volatility. And then with this notion of volatility, if you buy it in small chunks, basically what you do is you get an average exposure to the price of Bitcoin. So rather than, like, most wage earning people don't have time to be watching markets. They don't have time to teach themselves technical analysis, reading charts, reading candle patterns, all of this type of thing. And most people who try that get burnt because you can't play against the players who really know how to do it. So this notion of timing the market, timing tops and timing bottoms, you don't need to do that as a humble pleb, as a humble wage earning pleb. Yeah. The best way for you to do it is just get yourself the average exposure to it. So me personally, I've been DCAing, buying Bitcoin, because I still work a fiat job. Yep. I've been buying it for years on a daily basis. And basically what happens, if anyone's who's watching the video, I'm basically showing my arm going up over trajectory. That's the trajectory of Bitcoin, but it whipsaws up and down. This volatility will go over and above this trend line, but basically what you want to become is the trend line through that appreciation in purchasing power, appreciation in Aussie dollars, appreciation in US dollars. So the best way to do that is to buy it in small chunks and buy it often. That guarantees that I'm getting an average exposure to the price of Bitcoin, which is up over the long term. I'm buying all the peaks, but I'm also buying all the troughs, and I don't have to time anything. I don't have to see when's the best time to get in, when's the best time to get out. I'm doing it with money that I don't need from week to week, and I'm saving it over a long term, and I'm coming back in 4 years' time going, holy crap, look what that's done for me and my family.
And I think a key thing you said there was in relation to the 4-year cycle, because going in 4-year cycle just basically means it's a savings tool that you dollar cost average into over 4 years. And whether I know for a fact you don't look at the markets that much. So if you just dollar cost average in, and in 4 years' time, it's just going to be exponential. And during that time, if you go back over the chart, you'll see drawdowns, and you'll see peaks, etc., etc. But like here in Australia, obviously, I've been involved. I've had an interest in crypto since about 2017. I've done the same basically as you, dollar cost average. What's the easiest way for people when I've been involved with a couple of different exchanges. There's been Binance. I now deal with BTC Markets, which is an Australian-based exchange. The Australian banks have sort of put a bit of a cull on how much you can actually invest, how much fiat you can invest onto an exchange. So is there any other particular exchange or way you go about someone that would have issue with their bank about depositing into an exchange?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Adam. I always advocate for Bitcoin-only exchanges, particularly for new people. If you're coming to Bitcoin for the first time, I tend to find the Bitcoin-only exchanges, you don't get distracted by the shiny lights of the crypto, the latest meme coin that's named after a dog or something that's pumped 300%. Like most of them, 99.9% of crypto, in my humble opinion, are scams or otherwise completely centralized, unregulated securities.
Yeah.
So I tend to focus on Bitcoin and Bitcoin-only exchanges, and it's a self-reinforcing mechanism because I see Bitcoin really being a totally separate asset to crypto. I see them in two separate asset classes, and what I think is it's this reinforcing mechanism between separating Bitcoin. If we only had Bitcoin only exchanges, Bitcoin is now seen as an acceptable asset. Like we just had a whole heap of ETFs launch in the United States. They don't muck around. They don't just approve ETFs for anything. So Bitcoin's really starting to legitimize itself as a pseudo regulated asset, or at least palatable in the terms of the traditional investment world to be an asset. Now, if we didn't have all these other cryptos and all of these, there are a lot of scams. People will lose a lot of money and have lost a lot of money on these crypto. If we didn't have them, the banks wouldn't be putting restrictions on us because it's now a legitimate asset class. And I think it's going to be only a matter of time until banks actually offer this. I happen to know for a fact that there's Australian banks looking at custody solutions in their technical stack. They will offer you Bitcoin purchases. And I also think that as Bitcoin continues to legitimize itself and separate from crypto, if you are a Bitcoin only exchange, you're more than likely going to be able to get those funds through. Now, different banks have different restrictions. And, when you actually look at their fraud policies, you can see why. Because purely for all of the things I just mentioned around crypto, because there are a lot of scams out there. So from a consumer protection standpoint, they think they're doing the right thing. Now, we could put our tinfoil hats on a little bit and we could say that they may be threatened. That may very well be true. But under the guise of what we know is that they are trying to protect people from getting scammed. And I think if Bitcoin were continue to move across to be separate from crypto, from the larger crypto universe, then I think it's only going to be a good thing. And those rails should start to loosen up a little bit. So one way that listeners can, is to go into a branch and ask for a transfer to an exchange. That seems to be a little bit more of a legitimate. It doesn't tend to get flagged by the internet fraud squads internal to these banks. So that's one way people might like to think about getting access to it.
That's really like for a large amount of monies. If you just dollar cost averaging, whether it's 10 or 100 or $500 a week, I don't think there'd really be an issue.
Yeah, exactly. It tends to be over amounts over $10,000 is really what's sort of putting the flag up. I think most of those banks come out and say 10,000 a month. I mean, I've recently just done some pretty hefty exchanges for clients with a variety of the large big banks and haven't had any issues recently. But that's always subject to change.
Yeah. Talking about banks, there's been a lot of talk about CBDC, central bank digital currencies. Just in the last week or so, the Australian Senate actually passed digital ID to go through here in Australia. Are we becoming like China?
Good question. It's trending that way, and I think again, if we put our tinfoil hats on, which I tend to wear quite often, but it's the precedent is there, and that is an outcome that we're trending towards. That's a very real possibility. And I think that's just where people need to take a pause. Like, it's quite often when people, accept these quite invasive measures for progress, right? It's normally under the guise of convenience. Like, you're going to get your digital ID, Daz, and that way you don't have to wait in line at the they'll use all of these convenience types of messaging to get that adoption, right? And then most reasonable people who operate within society to a reasonable level say, take the sort of opinion, well, I've got nothing to hide. Why do I care? And that's the dangerous precedent, because we just simply don't know the measures and the extent at which people with power will lean into that power and abuse that power. And if you give them more options to be able to control the financial rails through the means of the monetary goods, that is really the cause for concern. So this is where Bitcoin's real value use case, from my mind, really stands out. Is it's a peer-to-peer digital money, a bearer asset that we can exchange as long as we've got access to the internet and a mobile phone. There's no one in the world. There is no trusted intermediary, no trusted third party, no person I need to seek approval from for me to transfer value to you. It's a
Yeah.
peer-to-peer exchange with no middleman, no censorship, censorship resistant. And, there are some privacy trade-offs that are made with Bitcoin, but there's some very good reasons and engineering reasons why there are privacy trade-offs, so that we can prove how many there are. We can prove that settlement. We can prove the ownership, all of those sort of things in a pseudonymous way, but not a totally anonymous way. Now, the digital ID and the CBDCs, the real dangerous precedent with, you said yourself, we're becoming China. They have had a CBDC, a digital currency issued by a central bank, and it could be a central bank digital currency. It could be a private entity digital currency. But if it's tied to your ID and the issuance is not controlled, the issuance is centrally controlled, then you're at the whims of whoever's making those decisions, whoever controls the rails on which the value is transferred. So what that means is that if I have the wrong political opinion, we're having this conversation right now, if someone's listening in and saying, well, this is a dangerous precedent for these guys to be having an open conversation about freedom, maybe I'm just going to punish him through the financial rails. And we saw one of the best examples of government's ability and willingness to abuse power is the convoy, the truckers rally in Canada through the COVID lockdowns. Now, you might have your own opinion about that, okay? But at the end of the day, in a free country, we have the right to protest. We have the right to stand up for our freedom, stand up for free speech, stand up for, and this is the democracy that we love, in most of our developed nations, Australia, Canada, US, whoever might be listening to this, UK. Now, those people were, if you ignore some of the mainstream media narratives, they were peacefully protesting, and they were locked out of their financial services. That's one way that they affected them. It was the middle of winter. They were freezing their asses off. They had no fuel. They were running out of fuel, and they blocked their assets. They seized their assets. They closed their accounts. They blocked their ability to access funds and money. And the only way that those people got money was through Bitcoin. There was a fundraising effort. People were running around distributing Bitcoin, basically, to circumvent the traditional system. Now, you can have your own personal views on whether you agreed with that particular situation, but most reasonable people seem to agree that we have a right to protest, and the government can't just go and shut down a peaceful protest. And it was a peaceful protest.
Yeah, exactly. The biggest thing I love about Bitcoin is that the scarcity of 21 million. You hear about all these other people talking about, all these what they call shit coins, and they trade it and things like that. I couldn't think of anything worse. And imagine putting yourself through that. Well, hours of learning how to trade, and then the emotional roller coaster of, the ups and downs. As I said, with Bitcoin, you DCA for 4 years and you don't look at it. And when it comes to the end of the 4 years, that's one thing I love about Bitcoin is the scarcity of it. Can Bitcoin be used for everyday purchases, or is that obviously something that's still being built? You've got these different applications being built on Bitcoin. You wouldn't go out and you go to your local cafe and buy a mocha with honey. Do you know what applications are being built, on Bitcoin to be able to rectify that?
Yeah. So Bitcoin, there's a concept called layers within Bitcoin. So we can picture this. So the Bitcoin base chain is very, very secure. It's quite slow. It's quite cumbersome for a transaction when you compare that to some the other financial rails that we may be used to. So on the base chain, it can be quite expensive to transact, and it can take around 10 minutes to an hour for enough confirmation to be confident that that transaction's been done. So clearly that presents a problem if you want to go and buy a coffee. No one's waiting around an hour for their transaction to settle buying a coffee. So some very clever people started iterating and started building what we refer to as layers. And the most common at this stage is called the Lightning layer. So the Lightning layer, you can think of the Lightning layer more like the Visa MasterCard level. So your base chain transaction on Bitcoin's more like your bank settlement from bank to bank. And then you've got Visa and MasterCard, which is a layer extraction on our traditional system for everyday payments, for transacting FPOS, all of these types of things. Lightning's very similar to that. So you make some trade-offs in terms of security, but you gain a whole heap of privacy. There's various trade-offs with that, but we're only talking about, like for Lightning, I actually, believe it or not, Adam, use Lightning at least on a weekly basis. Sometimes depending on, I run a Bitcoin business, we accept Bitcoin payments. Most of that transacting is done on Lightning. And then I build up a stack. I receive, I'm an author. I've got books. People, you can see behind me, the Beers for Bitcoin, the orange book there. People will buy books direct off me. I only accept, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the support. I only accept Bitcoin for those payments. You can buy them on Amazon and fiat, but I don't, we're dealing with people all over the world. I don't need the FX. Headache, the exchange rate headache. So I only accept Bitcoin payments for those books. And so with those funds that come in, they're all coming in on Lightning because it's very quick, frictionless. And then when I build up enough of a stash of that in a Lightning address where it's becoming an amount that I'm uncomfortable with, and I always kind of liken it to how much am I comfortable carrying around in cash? It's about the limit of which I would carry around on my mobile phone or my Lightning wallet before I'm moving it off to what we call cold storage. And I'm sure we'll dig right into what that means a little later. But that's I use it every day. And as more Bitcoiners come into the fold, like more and more people are waking up to Bitcoin as being at least a curious part of their investment portfolio. And we often say the wrong allocation of Bitcoin zero. But whatever your personal allocation is a very personal thing, depending on your risk tolerance and stature in life and, your available capital. But where I think as more people become aware of Bitcoin, Bitcoiners in particular, we build up community. We start meetups. We get together. We start meeting each other. We start building out a circular economy within ourselves. Like in our little meetup up in far north Queensland here, there's about 40 in our group. We get about 15 come to our monthly meetups, but we've got chippies, we've got sparkies. Sorry for anyone outside of Australia, that's Australian for carpenters and electricians. We've got metal workers, we've got business owners, we've got cafe owners. There's a whole circular economy now. And as a Bitcoiner, I want to support that circular economy. So if I need some work done, or I'm going to go and get the coffee, and I've got two choices, the Bitcoiner coffee shop or the non-Bitcoiner coffee shop, I'm going to the Bitcoiner coffee shop. And I'm happy to start improving that circular economy. And the more that grows, the more friction gets reduced in order to be able to transact in Bitcoin. And, I think it's an inevitable. It's an inevitability that it starts to become more prolific in society, more prolific in your local neighborhood, and more people will start accepting it.
Yeah. It's funny, with my fiat job, I work with, an age range from anywhere from 18 up to a bit over 60. And, you talk to people about Bitcoin, or what they call orange pill people about Bitcoin, and I've probably, talked about it for, the last 3 years. And out of all the people I work, I've had one of the guys that I work with closely that's actually only a few months ago made his first investment into Bitcoin. I walked him through that. but it's just funny. You see the younger ones, let's say from 18 to say 30 at work, buying their lunch day in day out. Junk food. You know, don't you know? Don't get me wrong. I was that age once as well, and I've bought junk food and all that, but the amount of money they spend on junk food where they could be quite easily be making their lunch, investing that money, dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin. Um, yeah, I'm probably sounding like my parents now, like when I was younger. But it is really hard to talk to people, about Bitcoin. They say, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme, um, it's a Ponzi or it's a pyramid scheme. But obviously with Bitcoin, you can become involved, but there's a lot of educate. You've got to educate yourself about it as well. And I personally think you probably need at least 100 hours, but people can tend to be lazy these days. They're just happy with what's going on in the world, but really at the end of the day, with inflation and wages not matching up, people are losing money. When you go to talk to people, when you talk to people about Bitcoin, um, whether it's people you work with, whether it's friends or family, how do you wait for them to approach you because you've been in the space for quite some time now, or do you approach them and sort of just niggle in their ear or something like that?
Yeah, look, I'm less evangelical these days than what I used to be. For when I first discovered it, I was anyone who would listen, you know, pay me any attention. I had to go out of my way to tell them. I'm less like that these days. But I also think most people know who the resident Bitcoiner in that friendship circle is, right? So I do occasionally still get people coming to me to seek advice and so forth. And I think there's a really good point that you made just when you were talking about your work colleagues. And I think it's this notion of high time preference and low time preference. And this is something that Bitcoiners talk about a lot in terms of how we navigate our world and how we see value and how we exchange value. So money at its root is a communications medium. It's how we communicate value to each other. And what's happened since 1970, without getting too bogged down into monetary history, but I strongly encourage everyone to go down the route of monetary history and see where we got to today. What is fiat currency? What does that mean? And the TLDR on that is that since 1971, we've been on a fiat currency standard. Our money is paper. It's not backed by anything except our faith in government. And it's literally by decree. Fiat means by decree. So it's a money that's been given to us by decree by the governments that we are domiciled under. And the only thing is it's faith in that you are willing to accept it. And we've had lots of experience with hyperinflation and in various countries, and it's really only the strength of your economy, the strength of your how many minerals you have, resources, exports, tourism, all of these things that make one country's currency any better than another, right?
Yeah.
Without sort of getting too bogged down into that distraction. But what it actually does for us, when we operate with a medium of exchange, with a value mechanism, how we communicate value to each other, that's constantly getting eroded, it's losing purchasing power, we actually start to change our behavior as humans. And this is a notion, a study called praxeology, and it's what Austrian economists really focus on: is human action. Us as humans, how do we navigate our world? Now, when you've got a monetary good that's been slowly bleeding its purchasing power over time, and it's been insidious, really. We've had some spikes of high inflation over the last couple of decades since 1970, but largely they try and keep this inflation about 2 or 3%. And what that is, that magical number, why 2 or 3%, it's the slow bleed that's not noticeable. It's the slow bleed of your purchasing power over time that you don't notice from day to day when you go into the grocery store. But what's funny is that in these last couple of years, they turned the money printer on through COVID, and we actually started to realize some real inflation. And the bleed has happened a lot quicker. So people are starting to notice it. It's like, hang on a second. I was only last year I could get a whole trolley full of groceries for $200. Now it's costing me $350. What the hell went on? And people are starting to wake up to it. So in a way, I'm thankful that we've gone through this high inflationary period, because it is starting to wake people up to say, well, how come we have inflation at all? If we have a technologically advanced world where technology becomes cheaper, our goods and services should be getting cheaper. But that is counter to a credit-based system. And that's largely, the whole globe is built on a credit-based system. They want cheaper dollars to pay off the debt that they're building up. And this is the whole incentive behind the monetary system that we operate. Now, just back to the point I'm trying to make with your friends at work who are buying lunch every week. If you can only save $10 a week, and that is eroding, that purchasing power is getting eroded quicker than you can spend it, essentially, there's no incentive for you to change your behaviors to increase that $10 to $15 or that $10 to $20, because the $20 is getting eroded just as quickly as the 10, and you can accelerate that to whatever wage that you earn and whatever excess that you earn. But the difference with Bitcoin is it really is starting to change Bitcoiners' behaviors. And you can talk to any Bitcoiner. Like me personally, we live fairly frugally, right? We're wage earners. We got 2 young kids. We were living hand to mouth from week to week, for a long period of time, until I discovered investing and then Bitcoin. And it really started to shift the way that I navigate things. And it's not to say that I've turned into a massive tight ass by any stretch of the imagination, but it does make you question the excess. Question, do I really need 4 subscriptions to a streaming service? No, one's fine. One's okay. So, and that little buzz I was getting from the extra 4, like having more options, it's just, well, now I just tend to watch other things. I tend to watch more educational things that are free on YouTube than I do on Netflix. So it starts to change your behavior, and it also starts to change how anywhere that you're seeing that you're spending money. For example, the junk food. So hang on, if I make my own food, or I bring over leftovers, or I cook a little bit more and I take leftovers for lunch and I heat it up in the lunchroom, I'm saving and I'm eating healthier. So I'm starting to get all of these self-reinforcing benefits from changing my habits. And that excess money that I'm able to save by not spending, I'm buying Bitcoin, and I'm looking at its appreciation in purchasing power, and it's only feeding back on itself for me to change those behaviors more and more. And then that makes you then look around and go, well, maybe I don't need that extra TV. Yeah, okay, I'm used to buying a new phone every 4 years. Maybe I don't need to if this one's fine. It just starts to play on your behavior, because the benefit to taking a different action is so much better when you have a means when you have something that's giving you active feedback to shift your behavior. It does inherently shift your behavior. Now, I don't know if I actually answered your question there, but it was when you said, I see that every day is the people changing their behaviors. And I guess your question was, how do you orange pill people? Well, really, when you start to understand Bitcoin, it starts to you start to incentivize to learn about it, and it really does touch on so many different aspects of society. It touches on the family bond. It touches on energy. It touches on monetary goods. It touches on investing. It touches on so many different levels. I really feel it's important to find people where they are. And because Bitcoin does lay over so many of these different aspects in society, there's normally something intelligent to talk to in and around how Bitcoin fixes this. Like we often say in the Bitcoin space, Bitcoin fixes this, and it literally fixes a lot that's wrong with society. And you can usually find something that resonates with somebody. It's like, what's really important to you? What keeps you going? Oh, war. I'm really concerned about war. Well, do you know what? If you're on a Bitcoin standard, the incentive for trying to extract value from people is minimized, because Bitcoin lives in cyberspace. It lives in 12 words in my head. You can't steal my gold. A lot of wars have been fought throughout history over resources, and gold was a classic one. We raid you. We want to steal your gold. We'll do it under some guise of some other thing. You really upset us, so we're going to come after you for this. But really, what we're after is your resources, right? And if Bitcoin lives in 12 words in your head, You know, that's an over zealous example, but it starts to minimize war. Is energy important to you? Well, it can actually help to monetize and make energy bills cheaper. Oh, is the environment important to you? Well, you know, it can actually enable a renewables future in a way that's actually possible. You know, all of these things, it's a fascinating subject. And I think that's where, to orange pill somebody, you just need to meet them where they are, find something that resonates with them, what's emotional to them, what triggers them, and then have a conversation about how Bitcoin fixes it.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you never sell your Bitcoin.
Absolutely not. I don't plan to ever sell my Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that some people, the obvious pushback to that is, well, why even own it? And I think if the more you understand and you study it, and you start to realize that eventually you won't have to, there will be ways in order to tap into the purchasing power. I liken this to, the best example I can use for that specific thing, Adam, is property moguls, right? So property investing is something that most Australians are used to. That's what we tend to go towards for most humble wage earners, is the real estate market.
Yeah.
Now, property moguls, if you've ever been to a property investment seminar, it's quite common for them to say you want to build up a property portfolio. And what you do is you nest them in terms of equity. You might have 5 properties in your portfolio. And once you've accumulated all 5, you go back to the first year and you tap into the equity, or in other words, the purchasing power that first property is now worth.
Yep.
You borrow against that equity, and you fund your lifestyle, and you also service the debt for all 5 of those properties. And then you go back to the second one the next year, and you go and do it again. And then the third one, you go and do it again. The fourth one, and then that 5-year cycle, you just keep going back and around, borrowing against and living off your property into perpetuity. Bitcoin is no different. It is digital property, and there are a lot of products and services getting built out. Some are in their infancy, some are better than others. What we kind of always caution is to don't stake your Bitcoin. Never give custody to your Bitcoin, and we can talk about what that means, but don't put your Bitcoin into an exchange and lend against it. They call that yield. You know, and if you don't know where the yield's coming from, it's normally you, and it's normally your assets. So there's a bit of caution you need to make with it, and a little bit of education you need to do for yourself. But the ultimate premise is that Bitcoin will continue to appreciate in purchasing power because it's a finite, scarce asset. We absolutely know, without a shadow of a doubt, there's only ever going to be 21 million. We know exactly how many are in circulation now. We know exactly the issuance rate for the next 120 years.
Yeah.
And we know that its purchasing power should keep appreciating, because when you look at any investment, any monetary good, any good or service, the price is always met at the equilibrium between the supply and demand for a product. Now, if we know Bitcoin's got a fixed supply, and it's the only asset that we can actually prove a fixed supply. Gold, we can't prove. We don't know how much there exists. We don't know how much they can mine. Bitcoin's the only one that gold's the closest, but even it's got all of the properties that make gold valuable, but all of the properties that why gold failed, it fixes.
Yeah.
And if we know that it's got a fixed supply, but all we need to do is look around and we see demand increasing. We see nation states adopting it. We see nation states mining it. We see nation states tapping into their available resources to mine it. We can see more users, people like me and you, friends at the Smoko table, continuing to ask. But we don't have to believe any of that. We can actually prove demand is increasing by looking at on-chain metrics. We can see the number of addresses are increasing. We can see the movements of those coins. We can see how old those coins are. We can see that old, strong hands are hodling, what we call hodling, holding on the Bitcoin, not moving Bitcoin. So we can prove that demand's increasing, and we can prove that supply is actually shrinking because more and more people are taking coins off exchange. So if that's true, if price of a monetary good is met between the equilibrium between the supply and demand of that good, and we know that demand's increasing, and we know it's a fixed supply, it doesn't take a genius to work out number go up, and it will continue to do so into perpetuity.
And anyone can jump on the Bitcoin ledger anytime as well. As So you can't jump onto your bank and look at the ledger to see what the bank has done with your $100,000, who they've lent it out to, or anything like that. So it's just a ledger there that for everyone to see.
It's a really underappreciated point, Adam, that you make. That you know, all monetary goods, our whole credit-based system, our banking system are just ledgers. Money is just a ledger. It's we can go back to caveman days. Like me and you were running around. I made a kill one day. We chalked it up on the cave wall. Said, "Hey, Daz fed the village. Adam, by the way, stop freeloading. It's your turn to go and make a kill this week." That's a ledger. It's a credit-based system.
Yeah.
It's a trust system. Again, comes back to praxeology. Humans, like we're social beings, we're cooperative beings. That's why we rose to the top of the food chain, right? Our ability to coordinate. And so when we move forward through monetary history, we went to barter. So we started to specialize in skills. Like you made arrows and I raised chickens, right? But that coincidence of wants was always an issue. So we had to, and what that means is like, if you needed chickens, but I didn't need the arrows, right? How do we settle that trade? How do we facilitate that trade? So we ended up landing on a medium of exchange, something in the middle between us and, one was salt, one was glass beads, one was seashells. And it typically centered on things that were scarce, that could be created and had some type of some inherent value, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately monetary metals were one of the best ones that we landed on. And then we built a credit system. So monetary metals and a paper-based system. So I can explain that a little bit. I suppose it's useful. We landed on gold. And if I wanted to store a large amount of wealth in gold, it was a gold bar, right? But if I needed to buy a horse off you, it wasn't convenient for me to go and give you this gold bar. So I'd park it in a warehouse and I'd get a receipt for that gold. But if I'm going to buy that horse off you, we're going to go to the same warehouse. I'm going to extract that gold. I'm going to hand it to you, and you're only going to put it back in the same warehouse and get another receipt. So very quickly, us as humans realized that this paper receipt was just as good as the claim of the gold.
Yeah.
But so we ended up with these warehouses, and that was essentially the first central banks, the first banks. The first was in Amsterdam. History of this exact thing happening in the Bank of England, and humans being humans realized, hang on, it's not very common that these people come back for this gold. What if I just put one more receipt than the gold in which I hold claim or I hold for those claims? And okay, I got away with that. What if I did 2? What if I did 3? What if I did 4? What if I did, I don't know, right up to 10%? If I only hold 10% of gold and I have all of these, and they got busted doing this. And there's a really good book called, it's by Murray Rothbard. It's the name's eluding me. I'll put it to you so you can put it in your show notes. Really good history on money and banking. So they got busted with this, but there was no precedent in law for them to get sent to try them against. And the decision makers at the time, the politicians at the time, started to realize how prosperous their economies were by having more monetary claims in circulation, because one man's spending is another man's income. And the more income and the more prosperous our society, the more money change hands. They call that velocity of money. The more that velocity increases, the more prosperous an economy eventually becomes. And that was the invention of the fractional reserve banking system. We fast forward right through to a lot of history, typically around wars, of them abandoning gold standards altogether, using paper, and the strongest currency wins. We spoke a little bit about that before. And then we fast forward right through to 1971. And from 1971 through to today, we do not have a gold backing to our paper currency. But essentially what it is, it's a ledger. So now we have it, and we add this digital layer onto this monetary system now. So we don't actually even have the paper to back the digital claims. So we're 2 layers away from a true value, a true scarcity. We had metal, we had the paper claims to metal. Now we've got a digital extraction on top of that doesn't even have as many paper claims to it. as we had our fractional reserve system globally now is trending towards zero. There is actually in the United States, there is no actual, it used to be 10%. You had to have 10% of cash reserves available for all of your credit in the system. They don't even need that anymore. So they literally have their own ledgers. And this is this notion of trust. So your bank, when you put your bank check, your wage into that bank, they have their own ledger, which you rightly said before, you can't audit it, you can't verify it. And they are saying that you've got X amount of claims as a digital representation in that bank account, and you hope that when you go and put your ATM card in that you can withdraw the cash. But I'm telling you, if every single person went to the ATMs tomorrow to withdraw all of the whole banking system would collapse. You try and go into a bank and say, hey, I want any more than $3,000 over the counter, they will more than likely have to tell you to come back the next day because they simply don't have the cash. And there is not enough physical cash in existence for the claims to that cash, let alone the credit that we've built on top of that system. And all of these are independent ledgers. Your bank has a ledger. My bank has its own ledger. Central bank has its own ledger. And we're just checking and balancing between our own. And there's an inherent amount of trust in that system. Nobody has visibility of everyone else. Bitcoin is stark contrast to that. Everybody can audit the supply. Everybody knows all of the list of addresses and the current state of ownership for every single Satoshi that's accounted for in that system. And that's it's harder. It's easy to say, but hard for people to really grasp exactly what that means. And it's one of the most powerful things that make Bitcoin one of, the most mind-blowing advancements in monetary technology.
Yeah, it's look, I'd say it's a shame not more and more people are grabbing it by the horns, but then it's good in a way because it makes it even more scarce. It's funny you talk about the banks. You go to the bank, and if you want to take out $10,000, they'll give you the third degree. What are you using it for? It's my money. I can do what I want with it. But in saying that, the benefits, so we've probably gone through it a bit, the benefits of a decentralization in finance and how does Bitcoin really achieve this? We've probably gone through it a bit, but can you, add?
Yeah, there's probably a bit to expand on there too. In terms of that decentralization, it's removing the middleman. It's removing trusted third parties. That is the game changer because there's always been an element of trust. You can't own pretty much anything in this world without someone else having a claim to it. Even your real estate, like in your local jurisdiction, you're beholden to the local government with your rates. You don't pay your rates, they'll come seize your property. They'll kick you out and they'll sell it under your feet. So do you truly own your property? Equities. Do you have the certificate in your hot little hand? How many certificates are there? Can you prove how many certificates there are? So it's really the game changer is that whole notion of decentralization. And why that's important is there's no middleman. There's no decision makers in Bitcoin making changes without global consensus, without adoption. So there are changes that get made to the Bitcoin protocol, but they're very slow, they're very methodical, they're highly scrutinized, and they're very rare for a change to be enabled on Bitcoin. And it's done through global engagement, global adoption, and global acceptance. So nobody... the best way to explain this is to probably explain a little bit around the architecture on what does decentralization actually mean. So there's a few parties that get involved with the Bitcoin protocol. There's miners and there's node and there's people who interact with Bitcoin. There's the receivers of Bitcoin, really. So there's your three sort of main players in that ecosystem. Miners will solve blocks and include transactions into a template and upload that to create what we know as the blockchain. And one block leads into the next block, which makes it immutable, makes it inherently hard to change because of the energy that's expended to actually create it. But the real power comes from nodes and people who receive Bitcoin, people who actually want to swap their time and energy and sweat into what asset do I actually want to own. So they're the real main two owners. And what a node is, it's just a bit of software. I run several nodes, but I run one main node in my house, and it is a piece of software, and it's part of this broader network. Now, if you want to make a change to the Bitcoin network, you can go for it. You can propose a change to the Bitcoin network, but you've got to convince me to run the software that you're proposing. Yeah. And why that's a powerful notion is the way I like to explain it is very much akin to, say, the Bible. We've got Bibles globally distributed. We'll just talk about the Christian Bible. I know there's many different iterations, but say you and I, Adam, it's kind of relevant. The example I'm going to give you, we've got Adam and Eve, right? But Adam and you and I decide that we're not woke enough, right? And we're going to call it Adam and Steve, right? In order to go and make global adoption, we've got to convince every single person, pretty much, who has a Bible to change their version of the Bible to Adam and Steve. That's the easiest way to explain this concept of, well, if it's just a bit of software, anyone can make the change. Yes, anyone can propose a change, but you've got to convince everyone else that your change is relevant and it's not going to break it. And there's that much wealth tied up in Bitcoin now. It is the most secure computer network in the history of the world. It's more secure than Wikipedia. Wikipedia is another great example. Like I can go, yes, it's code. I can go and copy Bitcoin, and I can go and start my own Bitcoin tomorrow. But we call network effects. It's like trying to start Facebook again. Like, I can come up with a new Facebook, but no one's there. No one's interacting with it. The network's so small, and it would probably be co-opted and taken over within quick step. Same with Wikipedia. I could go and copy the whole contents of Wikipedia, but how am I going to convince anyone to use my Wikipedia and not the other Wikipedias? It's never going to happen. We're that far down the road now with adoption that it will not be beaten. We've had 90,000 odd cryptos pop up over the last couple of years. And when you compare that back to Bitcoin is still numero uno. In the whole Bitcoin market cap, it dwarfs all the others combined. Like it's the Bitcoin dominance is clear. And the important distinction between why won't another crypto necessarily take it over is one, network effects we've already spoken about, but it's also everyone else has to go through Bitcoin's really benefited from this first mover advantage. It was the first. It was kind of released to the world. This Satoshi Nakamoto fella, whoever he, she, they are, we don't know. Most importantly, it doesn't matter. He released that protocol. The notion, the way that the nodes work, it's been released, and he can't even come back and make any significant changes to it. It wouldn't matter. Any other competing currency, to get to the same level of security, has to go through a period of centralization. And that's back to your question is centralization versus decentralization. Centralization in this space, easily said, harder to do. Bitcoin is the only truly decentralized protocol that exists because everything else had to go through some period of centralization, normally has a pre-mine where the founders have given themselves a whole big bag of the coins before they let anyone else get access to it. And it's provable. Most of these things are blockchains. We can see, like XRP is a great example of a shitcoin that like people thought, XRP is going to, it's the banking rails between blah, blah, blah. But it's the most centralized Ponzi scheme I've ever seen. It was pre-mined. Over 70% were given to the central founders, and every single pump that you've seen in the price of that, you can check the original addresses, and they sell into every single one. They go on and pay YouTube influencers $70,000 to mention their token on their latest videos, hoping that poor plebs, right? Poor plebs who think they've got no other choice. This is this whole notion of financial nihilism. Like people are so been so depressed by this system, so oppressed by this system, that they think their only option now is to roll the dice at the shitcoin casino. And
Yeah.
that's literally what you're doing. It's not to say
Yeah.
you can't make money. People do make money on shitcoins, but it comes at an inherent amount of risk. You are taking a lot of risk, and I don't see much difference. I can also go to the casino. I can put a big stack on, on red.
Red or
And
black. 50-50
exactly, and
chance.
that's what crypto is largely.
Yeah.
Whereas Bitcoin's, it's different. It's the only provably decentralized. No one's in control of it. No one's had a pre-mine. No one can, it was fairly distributed, fairly mined from the outset, basically. Yes, Satoshi has a lot of coins because he did most of the mining, but it was a proof of work. He pointed his computational power at it. He expended the energy to create Bitcoin, to mine Bitcoin. And, it was released to the world from day one. So it never had that centralizing a period like most of these others have to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, our time is almost up. Let you go to bed. Where can people find you, Daz?
Yeah, best place is Twitter or Nosta. So at Daz on Nosta, at Daz Bea, DazBea on Twitter. LookingGlassEducation.com. We've got a lot of free resources on there. The Bitcoin course is a 2-part course. The first is a lot of what we spoke about tonight around monetary history. It'll take you about 4 hours to get through part 1 and about 4 hours to get through part 2. So part 1's the why of Bitcoin, where it sits in the macroeconomic financial landscape, investment landscape. We tried to take all that language out. We tried to take all that jargon out and make it accessible to wage earners so that, people can digest it fairly easily. Part 2 then is if you're going to own Bitcoin, to smooth out, to ride this volatility, you probably, at this stage of the game, you probably just need to take some time to understand what it is, to look under the hood enough to understand where it come from, who Satoshi is, why decentralization matters. A lot of the concept we spoke about tonight, you'll find in part 1 and part 2 of that course, and it's free. Just go along and download it and do it, and you'll be, pretty well educated on Bitcoin by the end of that course, and it'll take you about 8 hours to go through for most people. Part 2 of that course, interestingly, is Beers for Bitcoin, the book. So if you can afford the support, we love to, any thank you for the plug. It's available on Amazon in printed version and Kindle. And it's just a really nice, easy way to understand what Bitcoin is. And then, of course, if you have you want to discuss custody. Custody is a really important thing. You've got to get your coins off it. When you buy Bitcoin, you've got to take custody of it. That's a big piece. We could probably do a whole pod on that itself, Adam. I'd love to come back and chat more about it. But if you do need a hand about custody, we work with the Bitcoin advisors. So we are experts in Bitcoin custody. That's what we do. We will sit you down, teach you the trade-offs in and around various custody options, and inheritance planning as well plays a really big part. The longer you're in Bitcoin, the more wealth you're going to accumulate in Bitcoin, the more meaningful it's going to be to you and your family, and you need to secure it, and you need to take custody of it.
Not your keys, not your coin, not your Bitcoin.
Preach. Amen to that.
All right, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I look forward to doing it again when you have the time. Until next time, take care and we'll talk soon.
Love your work, Adam. Pleasure being on.
Right.
Privileged to be on the first one, mate. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Bye.